Thank you, Art, for having me here. As Eric said, I do wear two hats. Professionally, I'm the CTO of a marketing software company myself, Ion Interactive. And there'll be one thing I'll show you in this deck that'll give you a little sense of what we do. But what I've become more well known for is this blog I started about 8 years ago, really looking at the intersection of marketing and technology. Not so much from the technology perspective, although that's fascinating, a lot going on there. But to me, what's more interesting is how the fusion of these two disciplines is changing the nature of marketing, the culture of the marketing department, the makeup of who is in marketing, the management, the strategy, all these fascinating things about how we think organizationally about running marketing. And we'll get into a bit of that. I suppose what I am notorious for would be variations of this crazy graphic. This is an estimate of the number of marketing technology companies in various categories out there today. And most people, when they see this for the first time, their reaction is usually, well, two things. First of all, some explicative of like, holy something, mackerel, cow, your holy thing of choice, holy unbelievable. And then the second thing is they will usually, their eyes move from the graphic to like me if I'm presenting, and they start to squint and they're like, you know, there's something seriously wrong with this guy that he's like moving all these little logos around on a page. For any of you who remember, you know, Monk, you know, this was the lost episode of Mr. Monk in the marketing technology landscape. Sad but true. So this started out with very humble beginnings. As I mentioned about 8 years ago when I started the blog, I was trying to convince marketers that they were becoming much more dependent on technology and technology capabilities in their department than they might have even realized. And so one of the ways I started with this landscape was just really Exhibit A in my case, to say, hey, take a look at all the technologies, and I bet you're using a lot of these. And at the time, I found like 150 marketing technologies, you know, everything from like search engine optimization to things like Sitecore that you're running for your CMS, you know, marketing automation was getting started. I mean, quite a few things. In fact, at the time, everyone was like, oh my God, 150 marketing technologies. How do you keep track of them all? And then a year went by, and I found 350. And then I took a break for a year. I'm thinking maybe this will just, if I go away for a year, maybe it will just, you know, shrink. But I came back in 2014 and it had not. I found 1,000 companies. And there were more than that, I know, because all the ones I did not include on the landscape promptly emailed me. Some of them threatening to do things to my kneecaps. So I tried to pay more attention in 2015 and found 2,000. And still hadn't found all of them because I got more emails. And right about now is the point in time where all the analysts in this space, or at least the majority of them, started saying, okay, well, clearly this is going to consolidate. I mean, this is insane. There's just no way that an enterprise business function like marketing is going to be able to deal with 2,000 marketing technology companies. And so I was like, oh, well, that's good. So 2016 should be less work for me because it will have consolidated. And sadly, no, 2016 was not the year of consolidation. It mushroomed, it really almost doubled, but well over 3,500 companies. And it may yet consolidate. This may be peak MarTech. We'll talk a bit about that. But I don't think it's going to consolidate back to the level of having a couple dozen companies. I just don't think that's on our immediate horizon. And part of how to think about this, or at least I would say how I think about it, is we used to have had a vision of the scope of marketing, like the sort of responsibilities and tasks that marketing dealt with. And within that, we also had a concept, you know, 10 years ago, of what is a software company? What does it take to make a sustainable software company? And those things have a certain size and a certain scale. And what's happened is basically both of those assumptions have changed. That the scope of marketing now, I would argue, is an order of magnitude larger than it ever was. I mean, we used to have, these very well-defined channels, a small number of campaigns, very well-defined. You know, don't get me wrong, there was always a lot of work to be done in marketing, but the scope of it was much clearer. versus today, we look at just literally the hundreds, if not thousands, of individual kinds of touch points that we now wrestle with in one way or another in marketing, right? And the shift from being in the business of communications to being in the business of experiences. I mean, it's a very exciting time to be in marketing, don't get me wrong, but the scope is much larger. And at the same time, the nature of software has changed. There are still large software companies, right? Sitecore is a great example, right? You know, very large, robust software company that's one of those pillar companies, but there's a whole bunch of other companies too. In fact, a lot of them, right, you know, are third parties around the Sitecore ecosystem. You know, you might have a tool that's incredibly specialized at doing search engine optimization audits. It's really good at it. It's never going to be a billion-dollar company, but it's a fantastic tool. And you plug it in and you use it, and it isn't that hard. And so this sort of mix is what gets us to a place where we have thousands of marketing technology companies. Now, I do believe the narrative that there is consolidation. I mean, you hear it every day, mergers and acquisitions. There are companies that are going out of business. The VCs who have, you know, pushed a lot of this, you know, are talking about the upcoming funding crunch. So we're definitely going to see, you know, companies start to exit out of this space. The challenge is at the same time, we just keep getting new ones that come in too. It is easier than ever for entrepreneurs with an idea using you know, infrastructure as a service like Amazon, you know, and Google and Microsoft Azure, right? You know, easier than ever for them to use that and open source software. So if someone has a really cool idea of something they could do that could change value for marketing, they can actually put something together pretty quickly. And so trying to balance where the trade-off is between companies that are being pushed out through consolidation and companies that are coming in with new entrepreneurial innovation, I think it's actually pretty challenging to say exactly how this landscape is going to expand or shrink. But I would say one way or the other, for the next 5 years, you're not going to have under 1,000 marketing technology companies out there. Now the thing is, this is actually not the most interesting thing happening in marketing. In fact, this is, in my opinion, a sideshow of what's really happening in marketing. It's a lot of fun to debate about, you know, the number of potential marketing technology vendors and are we at peak MarTech? And I think we're pretty close to it. But this isn't what's exciting. What's exciting is, and you know this well, I'm sure, right? Most companies are still in the early days of really harnessing the potential of this technology. They're, right, the vast majority of companies are even barely getting started on their journey. And we've got all these new opportunities that keep opening up before us. And so if we think about marketing technology adoption, not even just adoption, but right, how do we actually squeeze the value out of this? How do we change the nature of our business? The digital business transformation we started the morning with, right? You know, this is early in the phase, and this is what's so exciting. So most of my talk is going to be on what we do with that crazy curve. And I thought a good way to start would be, you know, I know it's the afternoon, you know, trying to just get over the, you know, post-lunch, long day, brain is like, I could sleep. So let's play a game show quiz here to sort of wake up a bit. I'm going to give you, we'll call it name that profession. I'm going to give you a profession on the left and a profession on the right. And this is a word association game. I'll put some words associated with each one. And then I want you to tell me which of these professions is marketing and which of these professions is software development. So we'll see on the left, analytical, on the right, creative, on the left, programming, on the right, design, on the left, automation, on the right, experience. All right, so which one is marketing? The one on the left? The one on the right? Oh, see, you guys are way ahead of me, right? Of course, obviously. You know, marketing is the one on the left. And you know, usually this would be the point in time where someone says, foul, foul. This is a trick question because both professions have these things. You know, it's fascinating when you look at all the things that marketing is doing today that deal with automation and programmatic thinking and analytics, right? It's developed a lot of these software characteristics. And frankly, at the same time, the world of software has evolved tremendously. I mean, most people in software, I mean, the hottest things going on now deal with user experience. You know, how do we think about creating an experience that will really break through? This gentleman is Isaac Wyatt. He's the Director of Marketing Operations at a company called New Relic, fairly large public company. And he gave a presentation at my MarTech conference last year where the thesis of his presentation was marketing automation is software engineering. And his main point of evidence was this screen that was split in half. So on the left side is a set of configuration windows you get in, I believe, Marketo to put together a nurturing campaign. And then on the right was some pseudocode, which is like programmer speak for, you know, all right, this is how our algorithm works, that does the exact same thing. That those configuration screens on the left and the coding on the right are, as we techies would say, logically equivalent. In fact, if you have a background in programming, the one on the right might actually be easier to understand. This to me was incredibly fascinating because, okay, I've known for a while that marketers use a lot of software. But with Isaac's presentation, the light bulb really went off over my head of, oh my goodness, marketers are also creating a lot of software. They just don't always necessarily think of it that way. And so that was one of the motivations behind this book. So the idea of the book here was, okay, well, if marketing's starting to look a lot like software, the software profession has learned an awful lot about management in the digital world for the past 30 years. Are there management ideas that marketers can steal, I mean borrow, from the software world? So one of the big examples that I dive into, about a third of the book is dedicated to this actually, is agile management. Agile management really started to come to the forefront at around 2000, 2001. And it basically came out of the fact that for years and years before that, software developers would tend to develop these very large projects that went through this very structured process known as waterfall. At the beginning of the process, right, we'd get all the requirements gathered. Then from that, we'd do all the design. Then only after that would we start the implementation. And then finally, at the end of that, delivery. And this could go on for months. In fact, in some cases, for some IT projects, it went on for years. And then a funny thing would happen, is people would get to the end of that, and the stakeholders would be like, yeah, that's nice, but now that I see this, I want something different. Or, yeah, thanks for delivering that, but actually now the market has changed. We need something else. And this would be the point in time where software developers would essentially set their hair on fire. They're like, what are you saying? You wanted this? I built this? Yeah, sorry about that. So after fighting this dynamic for years, a number of software developers started to say, okay, there's got to be a better way. Instead of trying to always fight change, can we try and build software in a way that actually embraces the fact that requirements are going to change? And that's where these agile processes came up, where instead of trying to build things as just one big monolithic project, to go through almost this iterative process where, you know, in things that they call a sprint, a few weeks at a time, all right, well, let's get a little piece, let's share it, let's get feedback, then let's build another little piece, get feedback, and so on. And at every stage along the way, hopefully you get something that's actually useful, that someone can look at and they can try. And whether or not you want to release that to the market or not, you know, that's a business decision to make, but the software and the requirements never get too far out of sync. So that was great for software. And over the past 15, 16 years, this has probably become the predominant way in which most software is developed, some variation of agile. Well, about 7 years ago, a number of marketers were starting to feel this same frustration because, right, this crazy waterfall, you know, you can kind of imagine that looking a bit like a yearly marketing plan, right? All right, well, we'll just, you know, get all the requirements. What do we need to do next year? And how are we going to strategize that? And okay, and then everyone. And the problem, of course, we've run into time and time again is just the requirements expected of marketing are changing at a rate faster than the yearly marketing plan. And so a number of marketers started to, usually if they were working at a software company or they worked with an IT team on something like building a website using Agile, the light bulb would go off. Hey, maybe actually we could adopt this Agile management methodology to how we run marketing. And it's not about not having a vision. I go into that quite a bit in the book of how do you do this iterative, incremental approach and still maintain a higher level strategic focus, a vision. You can absolutely balance these two. But by having this more iterative approach built into your management metabolism, you find that you can respond to things that happen in the market more quickly. You can experiment with new ideas in a much more low-risk manner. You can actually rebalance your portfolio of marketing efforts. So if certain things aren't working, phase them out more quickly. And I've actually seen some studies now. I believe the company Reiki, who also makes some agile project management software, just shared a report with me that showed like well over a third of the marketers they interview are now starting to experiment with some form of agile management. So I'm not going to go too deep into this. This is, I would say again, like a third to a half of the book is actually a very detailed walkthrough of how to apply agile management to marketing. But it is, I think, just one example of these ideas from the software world that marketers can borrow, and adapt. So I want to share a couple other ideas with you as well, too. To grossly oversimplify marketing, we could say it was the intersection of two things, media and messages. Messages are what we want to say to our audience, and then media is how and where it's appeared. Nod to Marshall McLuhan, the medium is the message, the way that media, the way people experience the media actually affects, right? What they take away is the message. Tremendous innovation over the years in marketing here. This is the art of communication. But one of the things I believe very strongly in today's environment is there is a third dimension to this. And because I'm a nerdy guy who likes alliteration, I'll call these mechanisms. And it really has to do with how something functions, how it behaves. Your website is your best example, right? It's not just content. It's how that content is organized, the way it functions when people click on things. Do you have maybe little interactive utilities, services? Do they sign up for an account? If they participate in a community, how does that work? All these things that how it behaves actually now becomes part of what the participants take away as an image of your brand. That just like media shapes the messages people take away, mechanisms take it away. And so websites are a great example. Frankly, marketing automation nurturing campaigns, how they're designed, the triggerings they do, a lot of the parameters we see built around programmatic advertising, what's going to happen to how do we trigger when to do retargeting to people, how do we know when to stop retargeting people, very important to keep that second one in mind. These are all mechanisms now that become part of the marketer's toolbox in creatively thinking about how we're going to deliver these customer experiences. So one concrete example of this mechanism dimension is the rise of interactive content. So what is interactive content? Well, we know content marketing is hot, but the far majority of content marketing is passive content, right? It's things like blogs and ebooks and reports and webinars. It's stuff where the audience either reads or watches or listens, but they're just consuming it. And most of the innovation that we've seen in that has largely been around the media side of it. How do we present it? Interactive content, which has been around, frankly, since the web started, but we've seen a real rise of it, an explosion of it here over the past couple years, is stuff that's more these utilities and services we offer people. And it can be things like quizzes or assessments or games or product configurators, things like that. And here the audience they actively participate. So let me get more concrete. Let me give you a real example of this. How many of you have ever done a Google search for something and you got an offer where you'd come to a landing page and they're like, we'll give you a white paper or an ebook in exchange for you filling out this form? Ever had that experience? Have you read all of those ebooks you've downloaded? Yeah, okay. If you haven't, right, don't worry, we'll give you an extension of another week to finish that up. So this is a very common way, right, in B2B lead generation online. That is classic passive content marketing. An alternative to this with interactive content is something that Dell recently experimented with, where in this particular campaign, they're trying to reach IT managers around mobile device management solutions. And they could have done this as like a, hey, download the ebook on mobile device management. Just give us your lead info. But they tried something different, where they actually put together what's a fairly extensive, it was a 20-page assessment where they were asking the IT manager, okay, well, things like, okay, what types of devices are you looking to manage? I'm going to jump around so we don't go through all 20. How do you deal, what's your policy for bring your own device? How do you handle data security, encryption? What do you do for people who are coming for guest network access? It takes you a good 10 to 12 minutes to finish this. And you might be wondering, who the heck is going to sit through like 10 or 12 minutes of like assessment question answering? And the answer is actually an IT manager who's genuinely trying to find a solution for mobile device management. If the questions being asked are insightful questions and the answers being given with them also are like, Dell is essentially communicating domain expertise here. The IT manager is actually saying, yeah, this is a problem, or yeah, no, this we've got, we're doing this correctly, we know this, long before they ever get to the end of the assessment. Now, of course, this is marketing. We knew the lead generation form was going to show up somewhere, so here it shows up before Dell gives them the results. Dell will not let me say what their conversion rate is on this form, but I can say Dell used to do a lot of landing page, fill out a form, get the ebook, and they are now building more interactive content like this. So you can extrapolate from that whether you think this performs better than the ebook. It does. But then after that, Dell pays it off. They give a very personalized assessment of, okay, based on these different answers, here's where you stand relative to best practices on some of these things, here's where you stand to some of your peers. They provide links to a lot of information that's now tailored to who you are, how you answered these. And they were very smart about this. This isn't sales content. They weren't just like, oh, well, the answer to your assessment is buy Dell and everything will be fine. Very deep educational material. People appreciated it, people shared it. So this is an example of interactive content. And again, now you start to think of this from a marketing perspective, right? I mean, you're not just designing content and information, you're thinking about these kinds of services and utilities and flows. You're thinking, even if you don't necessarily characterize it this way, as a little bit of a programmer. So this is that marketing side of media, messages, and mechanisms. And if we hop across the fence to software, we actually see I'm going to grossly simplify software too. I'm an equal opportunity simplifier. In software, we kind of have these three things of data, what we operate on, UI, the interface we provide to the humans, and then code, how the mechanisms of how the software actually works. And the intersection of these three things in software is what we consider UX. How do we orchestrate these all together? This is the domain where product managers spend their time thinking about how do we orchestrate these to deliver a wonderful UX. But when you put these things side by side and you squint, hey, those things kind of look the same. Actually, they don't just look the same, right? That if, again, you take these cases where marketing is dealing with creating a marketing automation campaign, that logic we saw from Isaac Wyatt. When you're building a website, if you're building a mobile app, I would argue even if you're developing a relatively sophisticated spreadsheet, I know nobody in marketing uses spreadsheets anymore, right? But Excel, the original marketing technology, right? So as we start working with all these things, actually, marketing is working on the right side of the field here. These two things aren't just similar. In a whole bunch of cases now, they are exactly the same. And so the thing that makes this really exciting for us is there's innovation opportunities by marketing starting to really explore the full possibilities that mechanisms give us as a creative dimension. So I want to jump to innovation management for a little bit. Innovation's a funny thing in marketing, right? So marketing has had a relationship with innovation for its entire existence. It was usually, though, a very simple relationship, which was innovation was the input into marketing, right? You know, the R&D team would come up with, you know, a new version of the product, and they'd hand it off to marketing, and marketers, right, we gotta use our two favorite words in the dictionary, new and improved, right? So we loved innovation, and our purpose was just to communicate the innovation out to the world. But now in today's world, right, with this explosion of thousands of marketing touch points, you know, marketing now wrestling with experiences, not just communications, marketing trying to find its way to engage people in a world where engagement is extremely hard to achieve, marketing's doing a whole heck of a lot of innovation itself. But the thing is, marketing also has all of its existing responsibilities that it had as well. And I like to think as a lot of those as scalability responsibilities. I mean, for instance, if you're in B2B marketing and you have a certain number of leads of a certain quality you have to deliver to the sales team, that is a contract, that is a scalable contract that you are expected to fulfill. It's not acceptable to just say, oh, yeah, sorry, we tried this month, didn't work out, maybe next month. So as I started to work on this book, I was looking at the distinctions between, okay, well, if marketers are managing both innovation and scalability, this is somewhat complicated, right? Because innovation is all about experimentation, right? Try new things. Scalability, right? We want to standardize. We want to say, yeah, we know this works. Let's just keep going with this. You know, with innovation, we want to explore a landscape. Scalability, we exploit the things that we know work well. Innovation, it's okay to fail fast. Because fail slow sucks, but, you know, fail fast, that's okay. In scalability, it's fail not, right? Like if you're on that contract to sales for how many leads you're going to hand them, you cannot fail in that mission. Not too many times without looking for a new employment. In innovation, we want question assumptions. In scalability, we're all about leveraging the assumptions. Innovation is very much about speed. Scalability is very much about dependability. And so if you were trying to manage either one of these columns, that would be a respectable challenge. But actually trying to manage both of these in parallel, that's a little tricky, right? How do you do this? So it struck me that this is, again, not unlike some of the challenges we've seen in software and IT. And maybe the solution lived in a framework that had already been sort of proven out in that world. And there was a framework that I've adapted to call bimodal marketing, but it really started with IT and something called bimodal IT. What's bimodal IT? So it's not your IT person who needs to be on lithium, just so we can clear that up, right? You know, they're very stable people. When Agile started to appear in the software world, in particular in IT, this was a source of some frustration for a while, because IT would find it had certain projects that did not fit very well with Agile at all. The way, like, for instance, a lot of IT infrastructure projects are organized. I mean, they do have to be built out and rolled out over months, if not years. They have capital budgeting requirements. You can't just, you know, change those things, you know, every other week. So those things did not lend themselves to Agile. But then they had all these other business applications they were being asked to develop that very much did fit with Agile. In fact, the expectation was increasingly you will deliver this in Agile. And this became a frustration, because if IT got too Agile, it was having problems with the infrastructure projects. And if it became too rigid, you know, for what it viewed through infrastructure management, towards these more higher level business apps, then the business owners were just constantly frustrated. Hey, why isn't this moving in a more agile way? And so the folks at Gartner came up with a solution, actually a very simple solution. It says, do both. Do waterfall for your infrastructure projects, and do agile for these more innovation-oriented business apps. Not rocket science, actually, pretty straightforward, but this has caught on. It's sometimes called bimodal IT, it's sometimes called two-speed IT. But I think this model actually makes perfect sense for marketing too. We know we have both innovation-oriented responsibilities and scalability responsibilities, and to essentially be able to identify them and manage them in slightly different ways. The way I refer to it in the book is this idea of thinking of aspects of marketing that we will call the core. That's very much about scalability and standardization. And then this more open exploratory area that I call the edge. It's very much about innovation. And one way of thinking of breaking down the resource split between these, which I borrow from another famous Atlanta company here, the folks at Coca-Cola had promoted for a while this idea of 70-20-10 distribution of their marketing budget, that 70% would go to things that they knew worked, basically were very likely to work, they'd seen them work before, 20% invested on things that were promising, they had had some experience with, and then 10% for, well, let's just try some new stuff. Let's get a little bit out there. So that's where the 70-30 came, but this is a somewhat arbitrary split. You know, it really does matter for your particular business how those two things are balanced. If it's 80-20, if it's 60-40, a lot of that has to do under the constraints of what you're feeling competitively. What is your market like? Do you need to be pushing more on the innovation? The thing is, actually, for a whole bunch of these things that marketing can experiment with out on the edge, there doesn't have to be an expectation that all of them are going to come up and become part of the core someday. In fact, most of them won't. Some of them because they just don't work at all, which, fine, that's what fail fast is all about. But some of them, they will work, but the expectation is this is going to work for a limited time. This is an opportunity we have here. It's working. It's great. But we're not going to plan to invest on this as something we're going to rely on for the next 4 years. That's fine. You know, so there'll be a small set of stuff that eventually moves from the edge to the core. And this gets super deep, nerdy, but there's some really fun frameworks actually from the software world of how you even think about a funnel approach to how these things get stage gated from experiments on the edge to stuff that's worthy of being in the core. So a concrete example would be how a lot of companies are now managing their marketing technology stacks. So what is a marketing technology stack? It's the collection of tools that you use, how they fit together to achieve your technology-powered marketing capabilities. And this screenshot here is Ion's, my company's marketing technology stack. And the backbone of it is what we use for like our own software on our website. We use Salesforce Pardot for our marketing automation, Salesforce for our CRM, deeply integrated with Datanyze. And that very much, these are our core systems. You know, our CRM, our marketing automation, our website, these are things we do not want to change every few weeks on an agile basis. We want to make scalability investments in those capabilities. But they're also very open platforms. And so what they've allowed us to do is experiment with a whole series of primarily social things on the marketing side and a lot of fun sales automation and sales enablement stuff on the sales side. Then a lot of those tools we treat as experiments on the edge. We'll bring them in, we'll plug them in. We don't spend a lot of heavy time on integration. We see if we get value out of it. If we do, we keep using it. If we don't, we toss it out and we get something else. And by managing these two things separately as core and edge, it actually is able to both give us a rational approach to our technology investment, but still give us the opportunity to try new things. And so that stack is actually one of a whole series of stacks. One of the things I do at the MarTech conference is I run a contest for marketers who want to participate. They can enter a single PowerPoint slide that visually represents how they think of their marketing technology stack. And the first year we ran this, we had 21 entries. This last year, we had 41. All of them are, the deals is if you enter, there are prizes for the winners, but everyone who enters, we gather all of them together, put them in a SlideShare deck, and publicly share it. So if you do a search on Google for MarTech stackies, you can actually download this collection of, dozens of marketing technology stacks. And what's always interesting to me about the stackies is, again, it's not really about the individual tools. It's that the way marketers have thought about how they visualize these pieces together, it's very much about like what was the organizational capability, sort of the strategy you were approaching to how these things fit together. And it's fascinating to see how different companies do this. But one of the themes that you'll see again and again is if you look at through the lens of saying which of these capabilities are core and which of these capabilities are innovative things on the edge, quite a few have adopted that model. So again, kind of hard to read, but this is the cover of a book called How Buildings Learn by Stuart Brand in the 80s. And there's two pictures. The picture on the left is an illustration of two buildings at the turn of the century, like before 1910, I think, identical, side-by-side buildings. And then a photograph on the right of, in the 70s, how these two buildings had evolved. And despite them starting out in the same place, over time, they evolved in these very different ways of being, frankly, two completely different ugly buildings. They each reached ugliness in their own fascinating journey. So Stuart Brand got really interested in this, and this idea that he really focused on was the notion that buildings aren't just a single static thing, right? They do evolve. And in particular, they evolve in different layers. The 6 layers he identified is called the pace layering. There's the site on which the building is built. And the saying is, the site is eternal, right? That's the ground you're on. Then on top of that, we have structures, the foundation of the building that, right, should be able to last hundreds of years. Then on top of that, we have things like the skin, the exterior, the facade. Then inside that, we have services, AC, plumbing, electrical. Then inside that, the space plan, interior walls and doors. And then inside of that, the stuff, furniture and art and things like that. And each of these layers, as you get, higher up that stack, they're constantly changing, but they're changing on different time scales. The stuff inside can change every day. The space plan maybe changes every few years. The services maybe change or update every, 7 to 12 years. So what do you do with this? Well, the idea that Brand was really championing here was, okay, if we know this is going to happen, change happens, can we actually architect buildings to facilitate that change? So that we're designing things like our services, the way they're laid out, so that it is easier to change the space plan without having to do expensive changes to the services. Fairly straightforward concept, but yeah, a whole school of architecture has really evolved around that. There's a story that says Stuart Brand was about 10 years later having dinner with the rock musician Brian Eno in London, and over some beers or something, they sketched out on a napkin this idea of pace layering for civilization. It's kind of the same thing of nature moving at one slow scale, and then culture and governance and infrastructure and commerce and fashion. And each one of these layers, things are moving faster and faster. And do we think about how we might affect changes in one to facilitate changes in the other? I will confess I'm not entirely sure what you're supposed to do with this. To me, it's like one of those cool things. I mean, how often does a tech nerd like me get to talk about a model that Brian Eno was involved in? But luckily, the good folks at Gartner, they did know what to do with this. And they realized, hey, this model actually applies a lot to IT. That IT is many different systems, they're constantly changing, but when you really think about how to organize it, they change at different levels, at different rates. And the way they broke it down was into 3 layers. This is the bottom layer of what they called systems of record, and these are like your fundamental data systems, right? Core customer data, core financial data. This is stuff you don't want to change very frequently. It's very expensive. A lot, is built on top of it. Then on top of that, systems of differentiation. These are usually more customized IT systems that are specific to how your business operates. And then on top of that, these what they call systems of innovation. All those cool business apps that everyone always wants IT to build to try something new. And those change constantly. And so by recognizing that systems could fall into these 3 different pace layers, again, it's kind of like the same thing with architecture. Gartner was essentially recommending that you design the layers below to facilitate change in the layers above. So as I was researching this, I was wondering, has anyone actually done a pace layer model for marketing? And I couldn't find one, so I took a shot at this. This is, again, kind of a work in progress. But marketing deals with different layers of change, too. You know, there's marketing we do for the company itself that's very much rooted in things like our corporate culture, our values, our corporate image. On top of that, very similar, we have things like brands that have, certain positioning in the market, value proposition. These are things, they don't change very easily. They change over years. And on top of that, we have the fun stuff in marketing, right? The campaigns, concepts, audiences, messaging, and these things change usually on a time scale of months. Inside of that, we map campaigns to particular channels, how we deal with things like media mix and context framing. And now we start to get into things that might be changing on a calendar of weeks. Then inside of that, we have particular tactics that we execute in a channel, right? Individual communications, individual experiences. And in classic marketing, right, this would have been the top of the stack. That would be the fastest changing piece. But today we have two other layers on top of that. We have what I would call iterations, things like A/B testing of different variations, things like personalization. These are all examples where we're adapting tactics on a much faster rate, and this, say, order of magnitude days. But then even on top of that, we have another layer, which is this feedback layer now coming in through things like social media, the digital metrics that we're now plugged into. This is stuff that we get in real time, that changes in real time, and we have to decide how we manage that. So is this a Brian Eno like, oh, that's cool, but what do you do with that? Or is this a Stuart Brand, hey, maybe there's some utility here model? Well, I'd humbly hope the latter, that really we can think about this many of the same ways that Gartner thought about pace layering inside of IT. In fact, actually, when we're talking about marketing technology, we essentially are talking about Gartner's pace layering for IT. We're just simply adapting it to marketing systems. But there's also ways we can start to think about how we structure processes in things like marketing operations, the way in which we layer things, such as our data strategy. Not all data is created equally. It changes at different rates, and by starting to break these things up, the whole idea is to say, hey, listen, we know all of this stuff is going to change. That's the single biggest challenge we have. The person at the graph this morning, I think it was Scott, right, with technology changing at that exponential rate and organizations changing at the logarithmic rate, right? I mean, we know that is the big problem we all face. So fine, let's embrace that and start to design our systems to facilitate that change and make a difference between things that we're going to run in a more long-term scalability function and things that we are really going to embrace that constant innovation with. I had one other example here from, for those of you on the UX side, Jesse James Garrett, very famous UX designer in website design. Actually, kind of the way he thought about designing websites was essentially a pace-layered approach. So that's very easy for you to change things on the surface of the website without having to, the structure could support those changes more easily. So this cover from Computer Magazine in April 1987, the featured story was called No Silver Bullet. It was a very strange cover for Computer Magazine. It's like something out of a Stephen King novel. But No Silver Bullet was this article written by a very famous software engineer called Fred Brooks, named Fred Brooks, who essentially the point he was making in No Silver Bullet is he said there is not going to be any one innovation in software. No new language, no new framework, no new process for how we build software that will ever have a 10x impact on software productivity, software performance. And this was a very controversial statement to make at the time because there were a whole bunch of people working on that. They're like, hey, I'm going to invent the new software language that will make programming 10 times more productive. And he said it's not going to happen. And actually, having the benefit of looking back over 30 years, he was essentially correct. There never was a silver bullet that had a 10x impact. I mean, collectively, we've had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of innovations, and collectively, they've certainly advanced the practice. But there's never one thing that just miraculously cured it. But it was interesting because Fred said in the same article, there is one thing that has a 10x impact on the outcome of software projects, and that is the people. One of the phrases he says, oh, well, great software designs come from great software designers. And since this was the 80s and Amadeus had just came out, he made an analogy with that movie, like saying, okay, well, the differences are like between Salieri and Mozart, that these best software developers could have a 10x impact on the outcome of the project. And if any of you have ever heard the phrase, oh yeah, the best software developers, they're 10 times more valuable than average software developers. Well, Fred Brooks' article was the thing that started that. And usually we call it a myth. You hear that, yeah, that's the myth of the 10x engineer. And it's called a myth for a number of reasons, partly because it's very hard to quantify this, right? I mean, how do you measure 10x there consistently? And then also, right, because we've shifted to an age where in software we really do like to think about the team, right? It's not the rock star programmer. It's, do we have teams that can really outperform? But for all those caveats, having worked in software all my career, I will say it's generally true. The very best software developers out there do have an outsized impact on the outcome of their projects. So how come we never hear about the 10x marketer? Right? What is it that's so special about software people at 10x, What about marketers? Well, I would argue there's three things that feed into that 10x possibility. One is talent, and there is no shortage of talent in marketing. But there are two other things that are necessary too: opportunity and leverage. For a long time, there was not a lot of opportunity in marketing to really have a 10x impact. I mean, if you were the creative director at a top-notch like Madison Avenue agency, okay, your time had come, right? You were the genius, that was going to win the awards, right? You had the opportunity to show. But there were usually like hundreds, thousands of people below that person who, right, it was not their opportunity. They were just working to fulfill that other one. That has changed, right? I mean, this explosion from a small number of very large, mass market campaigns to, thousands of all these different touch points. I mean, marketers have more opportunities than they know what to do with at all levels of the organization. And we see this, right? The third part of this is the idea of leverage. I mean, if a great software developer came up with a really amazing piece of code, once they'd come up with that one piece of code, right, it could be leveraged in the product hundreds and hundreds of times, replicated all around the world. So for that one investment, they could leverage tremendous outcomes across very large populations. Again, in marketing, for a long time, we really didn't have that. The way we had leverage was just cash, right? We could spend more cash on more advertising, on more promotional vehicles to get more visibility. But that's not really leverage. That's just spending money. But today, again, we know this has changed. Don't get me wrong, having money is still very valuable, but there are plenty of cases where, right, the largest budget does not win. There are plenty of cases where, the reason we have terminology around viral videos and things like this is because actually these sparks of creative genius that happen at all different levels in marketing now, the ones that really work and really work well, they get this incredible leverage. And so for me, when I came to the very end of the book on this, and going through Fred Brooks stuff and sort of stepping back and realizing the connections here between now marketing is operating in a world where it has a lot of these dynamics of software development, the most exciting conclusion for me was we are now entering the age of the 10x marketer. Now, of course, then we can argue over, well, it's not really, how do you measure the 10x marketer? And it's not really the individual rock star marketer, it's the rock star marketing team. And, we can have the myth of the 10x marketer, but this is a really good myth to propagate. So, again, please make sure you pick up a copy of this because they really don't want to have to ship these back to me, right? Yeah, I've taken a little more extra time from you. I apologize, but as you grab your cocktail and fun stuff, I'll be around, happy to answer questions one-on-one. Thank you so much, and thank you, ARC.